The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Welcome to another Leon Charney Report. We have a really eclectic and exciting show tonight.
Nava Semel, hi.
Hi, hello.
A writer, a poet. Welcome to the Leon Charney Report show.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Book number?
18, I think, or 19. I can't recall numbers.
And this is Human to the Bible. And it's revolutionary, I would say. What brings you to deal another time in the Bible?
First of all, the Bible is an open text and a very inviting text. That's the reason why it's so alive, and it's always valid for writers, painters, artists throughout generations and thousands of years. I think that the greatest quality, or at least one of the greatest qualities of the Bible, is the fact that each and every person in his own time can read it and relate to the Bible, and the Bible resonates for the person's specific time. I was influenced. You said it's revolutionary. I don't feel it's revolutionary. I feel that I follow in the footsteps of my elders, especially the Yiddish poet Itzik Manger.
Really?
Yes.
Well, you was born in Tel Aviv, no?
Yeah, I was born in Tel Aviv. I'm a Sabra, into a very Zionist household. My parents spoke only Hebrew with me and with my older brother. However, I knew Yiddish because my grandma, who immigrated a few years later, couldn't detect even one word in Hebrew. She lived her entire life until the age of almost 90 in Israel, knowing two words,
I have the same.
halo and ochel, which is food.
Food.
But in order to
I have the same story.
in order
with Yiddish.
to communicate with my grandma, I secretly learned Yiddish, but I was very embarrassed. This was my, dark stain, because those years in the 60s and even later, Yiddish language was the language of the diaspora, the language of the persecuted Jews, the language of the Holocaust.
From the ghetto.
Yes. Yeah. But as a kid, my father, who was an advocate for the Yiddish, because he always said the Jewish people was perished during the Holocaust, but we should not give a hand to the extermination of the Yiddish and Jewish culture in Europe. So he was one of the founders of the Yiddish Pil in Israel, and he used to recite poems by Itzik Manger, and he took me as a little girl, I think I was 5 or 6, to see the Megillah, which is the Itzik Manger's version of the Esther Megillat Esther. Yeah. And I was fascinated. First of all, this made me crazy about the theater, because I saw the fantastic imagination on stage, but I was also became a fan of Itzik Manger. And Itzik Manger took the Bible into his own realm, into the Yiddish shtetl. I took the Bible into my Tel Aviv experience and my Israeli
The
life.
frame is similar, like manga, yeah.
Yes, because first of all,
Remind me
it's in verse.
Yeah.
It's written in verse, which is a genre which is for many years was unpopular in Israeli literature. It was considered passé composé.
Yeah.
But I secretly remained a lover and a keeper of those versed songs, which in the Israeli literature, Alterman and Leah Goldberg still wrote in verse. So I wrote everything in verse, but the point of view is very relevant for today. It deals with issues which are issues,
It's very relevant.
what we call burning issues.
Let's go back to the Yiddish. Give me some example, a song or a quotation.
A few years ago, I found myself writing a script which was later became a movie, a TV movie for First Channel. And this deals with New Olim, or new immigrants in 1949, when they just arrived to Israel.
I saw
Okay.
it. I saw it.
You wouldn't believe it. I found myself writing some of the dialogues in Yiddish,
Really?
especially the idioms. I recalled one of the beautiful idioms that my grandma used to say, Die Liebe brennt azoi wie a nasse Schmate, which became love burns like a wet rag. And this became one of the main sentences in this movie. But the amazing phenomena of me finding myself writing dialogues in Yiddish, I didn't even realize how much of the Yiddish is still in my safe deposit box, doormat, waiting for the, like a kiss of the prince, like a sleeping beauty, to revive itself.
Of your grandma?
This was always lullabies, but my grandma used to sing me a lullaby in German because she was from Bukovina, which is a German-oriented. She used to sing the Lorelei, which is a very famous, by Rilke, which is a very famous German song.
Yeah.
And my father used to sing to me Tavas HaZahav, the Golden Epave, the Golden Peacock, which is a very beautiful ballad by Munger.
You remember it?
No, I won't dare embarrass myself singing in Yiddish.
Every night?
Not every
Before
night,
sleep?
but this was part of my nightly routine. Is listening to in one ear to a German lullaby and in the other one a Yiddish lullaby. Today I'm very proud about the fact that I know Yiddish, that I understand Yiddish, and when I come to see shows at the Yiddish Pil, I proudly reject the earphones that they provide, and they look at me amazed. Yes,
Yeah.
and I say, no, I don't need a translation. I understand at least most of it. I can't read, however.
Tell me about the mental challenge when you're coming to write about the Bible.
Freedom. I feel the Bible is a very non-politically correct text. It's it exposes the human nature to its full spectrum. It doesn't hide the weaknesses of the human being, and you can find in the Bible everything, the extreme stories. Let's take for an example Gideon, the judge. He dies. There were 40 years of peace in the land of Israel. He has 70 sons. One of his sons, Avimelech, murders them all except Yotam. This could be a Shakespearean plot. Murder in a family, but murdering your 70 brothers. There are so many stories which, for me, the Bible is a very courageous text. because it declares the human nature is black, white, and full of grays. I'm not going to censor it. I'm not going to beautify it. And in that spirit, I wrote everything. So in my text, for example, Achinoam, the wife of King Saul, she tries to prevent the battle on Mount Gilboa because she knows that her husband and 3 boys will die. The Bible says about King Saul that he fell on his sword. In my poem, or in my verse, the queen, she's the one who falls on her sword in order to prevent wars. Mm-hmm. There are many women in the book who try to change history, or I even speak about the what-if theory. For example, what if Cain wouldn't have killed Abel?
Yeah.
Then this would be a different world.
Another queen that in your writing is Sarah. Sarah and Abraham. Yes,
this is really an unfunctional family, which is also very beautiful. The fact of the matter is that our 4 ancestors, our really great forefathers, the Bible describes the household, the domestic problems in the families. The family of, look at Jacob and Rachel. He's in love with Rachel. He works for 7 years. Then he marries by a masquerade. He marries Leah. Then she gives him son. Then he takes 2 mistresses. A whole story, a whole saga.
Cooperate with.
Yes.
Cooperate with Leah.
Yes. And then he marries Rachel. And then her son Joseph is harassed by his brothers. Right. They sell him to the Egyptians. Look at this saga. There's a poem about Joseph. There's a poem about Benjamin, who is in jail, looking out, and he feels on a foreign land, right. And he doesn't know who is going to save him. The family of Abraham and Sarah, the flaw in that family is the rivalry between Sarah and Hagar. And I'm trying to get into the book of Genesis, wishing that I could change the events.
You want to change?
Yes, and prevent Sarah from banishing Hagar out of the house.
It's an interior feeling.
Yes, because I'm even telling her, if you wouldn't have banished her, then you would have saved us so many troubles. Because this malignant behavior, this the cruelty, imagine the cruelty of a woman banishing her rival into the desert with no water, and she's with her son. The Bible specifically says that God opened a well for them, ayin, which is also an eye. It's a double meaning in Hebrew. I love the fact that the Bible also offers me linguistic challenges. I can rephrase, I can use the phrases. I made Kohelet into a leader of a movement, rebellious movement, social movement. He stands in the city square, and
also psychologically.
Yes, and he tries to gather all the crowds, right, to rebel against tyranny, against corruption, against commercialism. Some of his Kohelet text sounds like slogans in a demonstration. En chadash tachat hashemesh, hevel havalim haolam. Protest. Nothing is new under the sun. I'm translating Kohelet. Sorry for the bad translation. I'm not King James. But so there's relevance to almost every chapter in the Bible. I have a scheme in my head to write a second volume of him to the Bible.
Yeah. Nava, you are not a naive reader of the Bible. Not at all.
I think that the writer of the Bible was not a naive person. So as I said, I'm inspired directly by the Bible and by what the Bible offers me. It offers me an opportunity to step in for a tango. It's always like an arm is stretched out and say, come to dance. Because there are lots of events which remain mysterious. There are lots of gaps which I can fill in. Let's talk about Bat Iftach, the very famous story of Iftach, the judge.
The saga, yeah.
Yes, he vows that he will sacrifice the first one who get out of his doorstep, and he does it. He makes the vow in order to gain the war against the Ammonim. And the first one who gets out of his house is his daughter, so he has to sacrifice her, which is of course a myth which we find in Iphigenia in the Greek mythology. But the story, first of all, I don't understand why the Lord didn't intervene. I don't think that he meant a human sacrifice. The fact that he accepts the sacrifice is very, very questionable. But there's someone's voice was missing in the story.
So what
That's
is your approach?
Okay, I gave voice to the mother of the daughter, to Yiftach's wife. And she comes forward in front of God and she says, take me instead of my girl. Let my daughter live. She offers herself. She says, and she attacks him by saying the fact that by blaming him to accept a human sacrifice.
To remind the Solomon trial.
Yes, and she says, but if that's your verdict and you need a human sacrifice, let it be me and not my daughter.
Unbelievable.
The Bible is full of such stories, and the book was written over 12 years. And I'll tell you why. I was asked, why did it take you so long to write such a book? And first of all, I didn't realize that it was a book.
You wrote to yourself?
Yes, yeah. I was the addressee of this text. But the Bible is open on my desk on a daily basis, because I don't know, I'll mention a few novels that I wrote during this decade, and The Rat Laughed, which is also translated into English and is available in America, which is a Holocaust story of a hidden girl. I wrote a whole midrash, a whole new interpretation. Of the creation myth, and about the fact that God looks at his creation and he sees that the human being is full of flaws, full of cruelty. He tries to recall and redo his creation.
Reestablish.
And in a book which will be published next year in America, which is called Israel, which is not a mistake, Israel on an island.
It's a fantastic plane, yeah.
It's a fantastic historical episode which is known to many American Jews, and that's the fact that in 1825...
Not too many.
Not too many?
Okay.
Israelis don't know it at all.
Not at all, yeah.
In 1825...
State of Noach, no?
Yes, in 1825, a Jewish state was established on the island of Grand Island near Niagara Falls by Emanuel Noach, Mordechai Emanuel Noach, an American diplomat, playwright, journalist, a prototype of Herzl 70 years before, which is a very exciting story because he launched this state and he made an official inauguration of the state. And he had a fantastic speech about the fact that the Jews need to change their identity in order to open a new chapter in their life. In my book, I made this spell,
he lost his money.
He lost his money because he paid his own for buying the property from his own pocket. Yeah. So he went down under. Yeah. My book, my novel, follows this historical episode, but it's not a historical novel. Mm-hmm. It's a speculative fiction with a question, what if? What would have happened if we would have lived for 190 years in America as part of the United States of America? In my book, I changed the flag, I changed the Magen David, it's green instead of yellow. And on Israel, they speak English and Yiddish. It's like a Yinglish language. And Hebrew is being taught only at the university in the Department of Distinct Languages. So this...
we could solve all our problems.
Yes.
In this way.
But referring to the Bible...
Indians instead of Palestinians. It's not bad.
I'm not so sure if we would have... In my book, we would have gotten into trouble with them as well.
Yeah.
Believe me. But the Bible reference in this Israel novel is, of course, Noah's Ark. The flood, Noah's arks, and the dove and the raven, the two creatures who leave the ark in order to find dry land and save all the people in the ark. So the Bible was part of my other books, and like drop by drop, the poems joined each other and became a whole pile of poems until 2 years ago I was approached by one of the most really distinguished publishing houses in Israel. It's a very, very artistic boutique publishing house which publishes only quality literature, poetry, and art books. On, of course, recycled paper.
Which publishing?
Even Choshen. Even Choshen. So you see, it's even recycled paper, and I think that the font is biblical font, and of course everything has the dots, like the Bible. The graphic design is beautiful.
Very interesting.
And I was very, very happy to publish the book, to add the book to their really exclusive collection of books.
Nava, you mentioned about you mentioned the Holocaust, and I know that it's in your background.
It's also a central theme of my novels.
Yeah, the novels, but it's concerning to the Bible too. You can tell us about.
If it echoes, the Holocaust echoes in one of the poems, maybe more, but it just pops into my mind. The poem about the person who was being saved from Gomorrah. We know about the righteous in Sodom, okay? You know the whole thing of Lot asking, let me have one righteous person in Sodom, the city will be saved. My righteous person is from Gomorrah, another one. And he looks back like Lot's wife, and he sees the smoke, and he sees the inferno behind him. And that's, of course, a whole description of the Holocaust. I mean, a very, of course, poetical, but there's probably more under layers, but I have to really, or maybe it's a challenge for the scholars and researchers. I'm sure they will find it.
You can tell us
definitely about the Noah's Ark. There's another one. There's the ballad of Abraham and the three angels. The three angels are handicapped people. One is crippled, yes, and one is telling a story that he is a refugee from a Holocaust. So the Holocaust lingers on. It's always a cloud or a shadow that creeps into the texts.
Can you tell us about the unique story of your mom in the Holocaust?
My mother...
You hired from your brother, from Shlomo, which is Shlomo Artzi, which is a well-known singer.
My brother is the most popular singer in Israel. I'm very proud. Right. I mean, I'm in literature, but he's really a front stage figure. Our mother, Mimi, who is still alive, tibadel chaim arukim, as we say, is 94 years old, As a young person, the age of 20, she had a family in Hungary, and from Hungary she was deported with her family. She had a husband and a little baby. They perished, and she ended up in Auschwitz, and then in another camp, a concentration camp in East Germany, where she was liberated on May 8, 1945 by the Russian Red Army. One of the interesting stories that she told me, which also is part of A Hat of Glass, that's the collection that I published in the 1980s.
Well known.
About the second generation, is that when she was liberated, she was almost caught by a Russian Red Army brigade, and she was very afraid of Russians. You know, some of them were not very nice to refugees, especially to women. So she was scared that she would be harassed or abused. So she went forward, and the only word that she knew in like Slavic languages was Żydówka, which is called Jewish in Polish. And the officer, he was a colonel in the Russian army, stepped forward and started talking to her in Yiddish. He was a Jew. And he put
from
her
the Red Army.
From the Red Army. She was the first Jewish survivor that he saw. She sat with him and she told him what went on in Auschwitz. Can you imagine? And he was sitting with her crying, and he put her on a train, protected her personally, locked the wagon, provided her food and drinks and everything. He said, "I'm the only one you should open the door to, because if the soldiers will know that there's a woman on the train, they will, rip you apart." And for 4 days, their journey back to Hungary from East Germany on this military Russian train. And when I naively asked my mom, how could you trust a stranger? Why did you trust him? I mean, being kept under his wings for a week, 3 days in East Germany, and then 4 days on a train. And she said, "What do you mean? He spoke Yiddish."
He spoke Yiddish, yeah.
She looked at me as if I'm totally nuts.
And your father was afraid of the ex-husband, of her ex-husband?
No. My father knew my mother as a young teenager. They were both teenagers in Czernowitz, which was the capital city of Bukovina, a very central of Jewish life and Jewish culture and Jewish German literature and poetry. Paul Celan is from Czernowitz, Aaron Appelfeld, Dan Pagis. These are two Israeli very known. Professor Tzvi Yavetz was a bosom friend of my father's. And my father, my mother went to Bnei Akiva, that's the religious youth Zionist movement, and my father went to the Anoar HaTzioni, that's the Zionist youth movement, the secular one, but they became friends as teenagers. When she came back in 1945, the end of 1945, she came back as a widow and a bereaved mom. She met my father again, and in 1946 they married and went to, instead of spending a honeymoon somewhere, the only photo that I have of their wedding is they're standing with my grandparents and a few, the two edim, the two witnesses, probably in the rabbinical center, yes, wearing winter clothes, regular ones, because the very same night, they went to Palestine illegally. They left Czernowitz and embarked on a train or whatever to get them to Yugoslavia, where the illegal ship Knesset Israel waited for them. This is a ship which was captured, illegal boat which was captured by the British, brought by force to Haifa. This is the probably
To
one.
Cyprus or to
No, first to Haifa.
Haifa and then
The new immigrants, there were a few thousand people on board, refused to embark on the British boats to Cyprus. And they had a fight, and the British shot 2 passengers. This is one of the boats where you have casualties. My father was the secretary of the boat, the official secretary representing all the immigrants, because
the press. Yeah.
No, he was a representative in front of the captain, who was an Israeli already, a Sabra. The captain was the captain who later will bring Exodus, the famous Exodus. Yoske Harel, who also became
famous,
and my father, as the secretary or representative of all the new immigrants on boat, wrote a diary, which is now in the museum of the IDF, the Israeli Army Museum. He wrote it in a notebook, and he wrote all the events of the voyage. There were babies born on this boat. He tells the whole story of the fight, the struggle, the violent struggle in Haifa. Then they spent 7 months in Cyprus, which I honestly tell you, my mom always looks back. I hope no British will eavesdrop to our conversation, because my mom sees the camp as a rehabilitation camp. For her, I mean, after Auschwitz, every camp where they fed her and never was comfortable. So she's the only one who never complained about Cyprus. She's even nostalgic about the months in Cyprus. Sun and food, this really rehabilitated her.
Their story is the story of the Jewish nation.
Definitely. It's like a spectrum of the Jewish saga. But there was another interesting thing in my family, which is in a microcosm of a Jewish tale, Jewish-Israeli tale, is the fact that my grandfather, my father's father, was an American Jew who spent most of his life in New York.
Really?
He abandoned my father as a baby, abandoned my father and my grandmother, and left to New York. No, as we spoke about Noach's Ararat, no Jew came in 1825, but in 1919, 3.5 million Jews poured into New York, and my grandfather was among them. He was an anti-Zionist, a Bundist.
Really?
Yes, and when he came back to the family, years later, I'm speaking about the early 60s, he came back and joined the family, and my father took him in. He was a person in need, he became blind, and my father accepted a total stranger into the family. I, of course, was too young to know the whole story of, the story which is full of scars, abandonment. My father always asked, why didn't he try to save us during the Holocaust? But my grandfather, the first Zionist discussions that I ever had were with my father. He said, the state of Israel is an episode, the Arabs will butcher you. I mean, telling it to a 6-year-old girl, okay? He prophesied a dark future for the Jewish people. You're in a dangerous spot. You shouldn't have come here. The only safe place for the Jews is America. And I was strolling him around these streets. I was born not very far away, and I was taking him around. He was blind, trying to persuade him that the future of the Jewish people is, of course, Israel. He refused to learn any word in Hebrew, so we conversed in English. He taught me English at a very early age. And we used to stroll in the streets of Tel Aviv, and in order to convince him that Tel Aviv is no less than New York, I imagined a whole different Tel Aviv. I described him skyscrapers. He used to go to the Yarkon River, and I already knew how to read and write. So I read Mark Twain. So my model of a river was the Mississippi. So I
That's
used
the
to,
Yarkon River.
yes, but my advantage was that he was blind, so I could tell
you
him
can
anything and everything. So now when I sometimes go around and I see the skyscrapers, the high rises here in Tel Aviv, I always say to myself, I hope that my grandfather somewhere, he sees that my prophecy was right and not his.
Right.
I'm telling you honestly, the fact that I'm very much interested in language, of course. There's such a resemblance between Hebrew and Arabic. There's music, the vowels, the throatly use,
The Shemic.
the Semitic origin. My son, my youngest son, is a student of, he's in Arab studies in the Tel Aviv University, Mediterranean studies, Arab studies. He studies the Quran, he reads and he writes, and he was also in the army in a position of being an expert on Arabic language. So I live with Arabic and I see the closeness. Ishmael and Isaac were brothers, God forbid, it's the same family. I wish I could go from one household, Palestinian one household, to another and read them the Bible chapter and ask forgiveness. I think that Sarah, I should ask forgiveness in the name of Sarah, because this is the original sin of the Arab-Israeli dispute and conflict.
Yeah. Right. Unfortunately, they separate.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm still an optimist, and I'll tell you why. Because my mom, who is 94 years old, a survivor who started her life from scratch, losing everything, starting a second family, she has now 4 great-grandchildren, 4th generation, and the next one will be born, the 5th one will be born in January. So I think she's very blessed. And she made me an optimist, because if this was possible with a Holocaust survivor, and one of my best friends is a young German woman, she's my bosom friend, she lives in Berlin, she sleeps in my house, she knows my mom loves her, she talks with my mom in German, she's, as I said, my mother's native tongue.
Yeah.
The fact that such beautiful relationships are possible between Germans and Jews 70 years later gives me a reason to believe that maybe not in my lifetime, maybe yes, I hope so, but maybe in the life of my children I can hope that there will be such mutual relationship and even friendship. I dare to be such an extent an optimist. There could be some sort of a coexistence, I won't call agreement, but a family-like experience in Israel and in the state of Palestine. Those two states would live side by side, and people will cross with no papers, hopefully, will learn about each other. It's too late for me to study Arabic, so I only listen to the Arabic that my son speaks, and I think that maybe could be a bridge.
Maybe Yiddish and Arab.
Oh,
together.
That's another idea for another novel.
Tell me, what is the reaction of the ultra-Orthodox circles to those
to the provocative angle of the poems?
The truth.
They are definitely unhappy, to say the least. I'm not speaking about what we call datim leumim, like you shout, yes, national religious. The beautiful introduction was written by Dr. Yoel Rappel, who is one of the,
of mine, yeah.
and he's one of the best and well-known professors for Machshevet Israel, for Jewish thought and he's a Jewish scholar. And he wrote the introduction, and he's a religious person wearing a kippah and shomer mitzvot, and he was so enthusiastic and he gave me such a support to publish the poem. He was actually one of the initiators. He was pushing me all. He says, Nava, you must publish it, Nava, you must publish it, and then he wrote the introduction. But we live in a very strange and eerie, dark times in Israel, where everything becomes extremes.
Very fanatical.
And I got yesterday a very nasty mail from an ultra-Orthodox reader. I gave an interview to the press. He, of course, didn't read the book.
Yeah.
He judged the book or misjudged the book by the interview, and he said, how dare you even touch the Holy Bible? It's too holy for anyone to do any interpretation.
Frightened your son.
My son was a bit alarmed. He said, do we need a bodyguard? I said, I hope not. But it reminded me about the fact that people, artists, scholars, who found themselves in the Bible and the Bible within themselves and wrote their own thoughts about the Bible, were harassed even in history. I have very, very big footsteps like Hamalbim and Shadal and Kasuto and Rashbam,
grandson of Rashi.
the grandson of Rashi. Rashi was, of course, the greatest scholar of the Bible. And Rashbam, his grandson tells that he quotes his grandfather, Rashi, as saying that if he would have had a chance to rewrite or reinterpret the Bible again, he would have done it with pleasure, and he quotes it. I would interpret it according to the interpretation that are renewed on a daily basis. Yeah. So if Rashi said that, I feel totally protected.
Nava Semel,
thank you very, very much. It was a mutual pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have with us today two in-depth, not correspondents. One's an in-depth politician, the deputy mayor of Tel Aviv, Yitzhak Ben Artzi, who has a very famous son, Shlomo Artzi, who's a marvelous, marvelous singer. We ought to play his tapes one day. And we have Yaron Svarei, who was on about 3 or 4 weeks ago when we discussed all the possibilities of what would happen. And so far we're on score. And he's from Chadashot, the afternoon newspaper in Israel. Started off basically as a sports newspaper, but now getting very heavy into politics. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good evening. Shalom.
Anyway, talk about something positive now, the tremendous Soviet emigration to Israel, Jewish emigration. How is it being handled in Israel today? I understand that you're in charge of this aspect with, as it concerns Tel Aviv.
Yes, the new system is the direct absorption. Direct absorption means that you are not passing through Merkaz Klita, through some places to absorption center, but you are going from the airport either to your apartment or for a few days in a hotel, and during the days you are staying in the hotel, you get an apartment.
How does that work?
It works very well because, but here you need the function of the municipality. The municipality plays a big role here, and the volunteers are playing a big role here. Because as a new immigrant, you are passing the shock of leaving a different system, the communist world, during 24 or 48 hours, you are in a new system. You don't know the language, you don't know the system.
No, I understand why you do it, but the logistics are phenomenal if they happen because you're eliminating a lot of bureaucracy.
Yes.
An immigrant gets off the plane, he's driven to an apartment in Tel Aviv. He has an apartment, it may be sparsely furnished, but it's furnished.
It's not furnished.
But he's got a bed, I'm sure.
Yes, he has a bed, he has a table with two chairs.
So what do? You get calls and telling you how many people will be coming in 2 days?
No.
How does it work?
The process starts. The first thing is he has to study Hebrew. The municipality, together with the government, they are organizing the courses for Hebrew. Before he got the Hebrew courses inside the Merkaz Klita, inside the center of absorption.
Center.
Now he is spread all over the city, and you have to create some centers where he can get, during 5 years, the elementary Hebrew. The second problem is his children. You have to introduce them in the schools. This is a relatively young aliyah, and we absorbed about 3,000 immigrants in Tel Aviv. I'm speaking only about Tel Aviv. We're not speaking about greater Tel Aviv.
Now, who pays for the housing?
The government, the Misrad HaKlita. It means they have a certain ceiling, and they pay the sum for him for the whole year, so that he is assured for the whole year. Apart 5 months of this year, he has to study Hebrew. The second half of the year, he is a candidate to get a job. If he doesn't get a job, then they prolong him the study of Hebrew, at least not to lose the time, then he gets 5 months more of Hebrew, staying on the account of the government.
Who owns the apartments? It's interesting.
The apartments are mostly in the southern areas of Tel Aviv. It means the cheap areas, because the sailing is such a sailing that you can't get an apartment in the rich areas.
Do private people give?
Private people, yes. For example, we discovered through the municipality 1,500 houses, empty apartments.
Really?
Yes. And I addressed a letter to all these people, asking them.
My producer's willing to become Russian to get an apartment.
Yes, it's not. Don't believe me; they are not the best apartments.
I believe you.
But there are some interests why the people doesn't declare or doesn't rent it because they are afraid. Rights of.
Yitzhak, I've been to Russia, and you've been to Russia.
I have been, yeah.
I saw apartments in Russia that they're as big as the stage right here. So that they're getting fine apartments, and I assume they're very happy with what they're doing.
Yes. No doubt that for many of the people, the standard of living improves, even in this kind of apartments. We are paying a big attention to absorbing the children. We have about 1,000 youngsters in the schools of Tel Aviv, and I think that if we succeed to absorb the youngsters during a short time, this is the best way to avoid Yerida and leaving Israel on behalf of the parents, because they will have their doubts if they see that their children are happy.
I think your Soviet emigration does it. I think the feeling of Soviet emigration brings Israel back to the 40 years ago.
The old days of Zionism.
The old days of Zionism.
And I won't say, as Lenin said, it's so worse that it must
can only improve.
Must be better, and I hope.
Pleasure to be an honest politician.
Thank you.
Yaron will be seeing you. You're still in town.
Be well, my friend.
Thank you.